This is my list of the top 10 atheism-related stories of the year. Keep in mind that it's probably a little more US and internet-centric than maybe all the stories that are out there, because that's the world I live in. So there's your disclaimer. Number 10. Kyrsten Sinema, a Democratic congresswoman from Arizona. She was elected to Congress in 2012, but earlier this year when she actually swore in, she actually took her oath on the Constitution instead of the Bible. And to me, that's a pretty big significant event. She is currently the only person in Congress out of all 535 people currently in Congress. She is the only person who has no religious affiliation listed there. She will not call herself an atheist, by the way. She refuses to even answer that sort of question. She says she doesn't use any labels. But I think it's significant to note there's only one person who doesn't use a religious label, who took an oath on the Constitution, and there's a picture of her with John Boehner standing with the Constitution there, whereas pretty much all the other Congress people, most of them anyway, are swearing in on a Bible. I think that's a significant move. I think it's also significant to point out she's the only one. You would think everyone would swear in on the Constitution, and that non-religious, or at least people who don't claim a religious affiliation, if it was more representative of the U.S. population, there'd be a whole lot more of them. But no, she's the only one. So I think it's important to note that she took an oath on the Bible when she swore into the U.S. House of Representatives. Number 9, the American Atheist Monument in Bradford County, Florida. So here's the story behind this. Basically, a Christian organization had installed a Ten Commandments monument outside the Bradford County Courthouse in Florida. And American Atheists tried to sue over this thing. And basically, long story short, the Ten Commandments monument was not being removed from the courthouse. So they decided to fight fire with fire. They got donations, and they put in some of their own money, I believe, and they installed a monument of their own. It's a bench with quotations from our founding fathers about church-state separation, from notable atheists, just as a response to the monument. And the reason I think this is one of the big stories of the year is because it shows kind of this big trend of when Christians do something with the government, the atheists, more so this year than I think I've ever seen in years past, they would respond in kind. They would say, oh, you have a monument there? Well, then we're going to put a monument there too. And people go crazy when the atheist monuments are there because they can't believe anyone would allow atheists at all to install anything because it's a Christian country and, God bless America and all of that. But whatever, the atheists are in the right here. So American Atheists put in that monument, and it's a nice bench. And by the way, exactly 3 weeks after it was installed, it was vandalized by somebody really quickly. And you didn't see a lot of stories about that, but I guarantee you if that happened to the Ten Commandments monument, you would have seen stories about that. But I love that idea of just a response. And by the way, you don't have to like the design of the bench, and you don't have to like what the bench says, but I think it is noteworthy that as soon as Christians did something and got this special privilege, there were atheists there waiting to jump in. And that is an important trend, and I think we're going to see that in the coming year too. Number 8 is Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia telling a reporter for New York Magazine that he believes in the devil. Now, this is not surprising to anybody who's been following him for a while. He's a pretty hardcore Catholic. But in this interview, he almost went out of his way to say he believes in like a literal physical devil. Not even as a metaphor for evil, but like he believes that there is something out there, a force for evil, that is literally there. And even the reporter was like, you actually believe that? And he's like, what? I believe what a lot of Americans believe. Get out some more and meet these people. Because I don't know, she probably doesn't hang around a lot of people who literally believe in the devil. But here's why I think that's an important story. Realize, Justice Scalia, I know he's the conservative on the Supreme Court, or he's one of them anyway, but it's important to note that he is one of the most powerful people in the country, and he is proud of the fact that he believes in complete nonsense. And he's parading this like it's a badge of honor. And kudos to the reporter for, she had to do her job too, but she's just like, wow, you actually believe this thing. And he's looking at her like she's the crazy one. No, like he believes in the devil. I mean, we've had presidents who believe in this stuff too. So it's just mind-boggling that people who, and by the way, Scalia other than just a president, his job is to make decisions based on weighing all the evidence. And clearly he believes in something that has no evidence whatsoever. So when it comes to his judgment, I mean, forget his ideological leanings, just his judgment alone, he's proudly displaying to the world he doesn't care about the evidence, which is kind of appalling for any judge to say, much less a Supreme Court justice. So just the fact that was highlighted and that was a story for a while, it's like, wow, there's a person at the highest court of the land who doesn't care one bit about what the facts point to. Number 7 is Reddit atheism being taken off the front page of the site. And I know you're going to mock me in the comments below for saying this, but I think it's a significant story. Reddit is one of the most trafficked websites on the internet. And if you go there, what Reddit is basically consists of a bunch of smaller subreddits, and they take the most popular ones and they make it their default homepage for any random person who signs in. And for a long while, Reddit atheism, where you had a bunch of atheism-related stories, was part of that default group. So that meant any random person who went to Reddit would see stories about atheism, usually from a pro-atheism perspective. Well, over the summer, without getting into all the nitty-gritty of what happened, Reddit decided that the atheism subcategory was not up to snuff. And so what they decided to do is to just take it away from the default setting. And so if you subscribe specifically to that category, you will get stories about atheism all over the place. Some of them are really interesting. Some of them, it's a little self-gratifying. And a lot of it's just amusing pictures and whatnot. But I like the site. I think it's an important category there. And, that's the site that helped Jessica Alquist spread her story. It's the site that helped Damon Fowler share what was going on with him in his state. So, I mean, this is a site that has raised a lot of money for good causes. It has helped a lot of people become atheists. But the Reddit administrators decided to take it off their front page. And here's the significance of that. Now, it means that if a random stranger goes to the Reddit website and they're not a member and they don't subscribe to the Reddit subcategory of atheism, they don't see stories about atheism anymore. And that's disappointing, because it used to be a couple years ago, and for the past couple years anyway, that if there was a huge story dealing with religion, anyone would see it on the front page. I had a couple stories myself go totally viral, and a lot of strangers who would never have heard of my site, who never would have cared about atheism stories, they saw the story and they took action on it, or at least they spread awareness of that issue. And that doesn't happen anymore, because you have to, opt in instead of opt out of the Reddit atheism subcategory. And again, I realize that is something most people won't care about, but I think when you have the most popular website about religion on the internet telling its huge user base, you know what, if you want to hear stories about atheism, you have to click on a button in order to do that. A lot of people are going to miss out on those stories, and I think that is a significant issue. Number 6 is Senator Barney Frank coming out as an atheist after he leaves office. So the basic story about this is Barney Frank was in the House of Representatives for many, many years. He finally retired. And then when there was a special election in Massachusetts to replace John Kerry, who became Secretary of State, he wanted to be picked by the governor to become the next senator. And he would have been probably an openly atheist senator, maybe for the first time. But instead, he didn't get picked, but he went on Bill Maher's talk show on HBO, and at some point during the segment that is only online after the real show airs, he alluded to the fact that he was an atheist. And Bill Maher, of course, was thrilled about this, but here's why this is significant for me. You have one of the most powerful people in the House of Representatives who was openly gay, and proudly so, and a huge force for good for LGBT Americans and allies. He was great for that. But he always told people he was Jewish. Culturally Jewish, mind you, and if you knew him personally, I'm sure you would know, well, he doesn't actually believe in God. But to the public, he was labeled as Jewish. And yet this whole time he was an atheist, but he never said that publicly. And I was really disappointed by the fact that this guy, who I've looked up to for a long time, came out of the woodworks and said, oh, I don't believe in God. But he waited until he was out of public office and until after he was not appointed to be senator to do that. It just goes to show how difficult it is to be an out atheist and still get elected to public office. I mean, here's a guy who didn't even have any more elected. He wasn't going to run any more campaigns, but he didn't come out until, a part of the show on HBO that most people didn't even see because it was only online. So I don't know. It's disappointing in some ways. I'm glad he's finally out. I'm glad we can call him an atheist now, but I can't believe he had to wait until all of his days of power were gone before he could finally do that. Number 5. The IRS finally got sued for allowing churches to endorse candidates from the pulpit. You may know that churches are tax exempt, and part of the deal there, part of the bargain, is that when you are preaching on a Sunday morning, you can't say, hey, church members, go vote for the Republican. That is part of the deal. There is even a thing called Pulpit Freedom Sunday where they encourage pastors when they're preaching on a day to tell their congregations to go vote for particular candidates in defiance of the law. Well, last year in 2012, the Freedom from Religion Foundation sued the IRS for not putting a stop to this because they've been trying to alert the IRS, and so have groups like Americans United for Separation of Church and State. They've been alerting the IRS about this problem for years. I mean, and a lot of these churches, they broadcast it to the world that they're defying the law and endorsing a candidate. They put the video up online. And here's these atheist groups, these church-state separation groups saying, hey, IRS, you should revoke their tax-exempt status because they are openly defying the law, and the IRS never has done that. And part of the reason is they had a gap. They had someone missing from the position that would have been watchdogging that. Well, it shouldn't matter. The IRS should still go after them. Well, last year, the Freedom from Religion Foundation filed a lawsuit against the IRS, and this year, in August, we found out that a district judge said, that's a fair lawsuit. It's allowed to go through the court process. It doesn't mean the atheists won. It doesn't mean church-state separation advocates have won the case yet. But they green-lighted the case and said, all right, bring it on. Let's see the evidence from both sides, and let's weigh this case on the merits instead of just dismissing it outright. That's a huge step. So we don't know how that's going to turn out yet. But once we hear the verdict on that, that could be a huge game changer. Number 4. Joe Klein of Time magazine said that organized groups of secular humanists would not be found helping people after a disaster. So back in June, there was a cover story in Time magazine about soldiers who came home from war and often suffered post-traumatic stress disorder. And he said one of the ways they were actually not getting post-traumatic stress disorder was volunteering and helping people, especially after a disaster. And he pointed to instances like the Oklahoma tornado that went through, and how a lot of veterans were there helping out, and their instances of, having PTSD were significantly lower. Well, in the middle of this piece that had nothing to do, at least on hand, with atheists, didn't have directly anything to do with atheists, he made this comment. Veterans are doing this, dash. Funny how you don't see organized groups of secular humanists handing out hot meals. And then went back to his piece. It's just kind of this random attack on secular humanists, saying that they don't help out after tragedies in the middle of this piece that had nothing to do with that. And not only was it a random ad-lib, it came out of nowhere, but it was completely untrue because there were organized groups of secular humanists handing out hot meals, and they were pitching in money, and they were on the ground helping people who needed help. So not only was this an untrue claim, but it added to the stereotype that only Christians, only religious people do good. And after a disaster, atheists are nowhere to be found. That whole slander that there are no atheists in foxholes. It's a lot like that. Like, no, we are there. We're on the ground. I can prove to you we're on the ground. Well, Joe Klein never really responded to all the criticism he faced for that, because believe me, people were on him on Twitter, and they were writing to Time magazine, canceling subscriptions. He didn't do anything. And then a couple weeks later, Time magazine said, we got a lot of criticism. We got a lot of feedback from readers who were upset that Joe Klein said that atheists were less likely to help out. And here's some of what they had to say. It's like, well, one, that's not really an apology. And two, he didn't say we were less likely, which is not true. He said we were not there at all. So even Time magazine, hearing all that feedback, didn't seem to care that he blatantly lied in their pages. So, for Time Magazine to do that, for a reporter to be able to say such a nasty thing about an entire group of people and get away with it, essentially, he's still writing for the magazine, it's so disappointing. But I think it's also optimistic when you think about how our community at large really banded together and all basically wrote letters, canceled subscriptions, spread the word about how untrue that was. And I think both his slander and the way people responded back, I think those both things are noteworthy from this past year. Number 3 is that Dave Silverman, the president of American Atheists, became a regular panelist on the Fox News channel. So I'm sure I'm gonna get some feedback on this one, but I think this is important. Usually when an atheist goes on any TV channel to be interviewed, it's something that doesn't happen very often. Maybe there's a story involving atheists and they need a token atheist to respond to some things. I've been fortunate to do it a couple of times. But Dave Silverman, as the president of a very aggressive atheist organization, he gets called to do it a lot of times. I mean, you guys know the meme online of his face when Bill O'Reilly said, tide goes in, tide goes out, and that never changes. Well, this year, especially in the months leading up to the war on Christmas, Dave Silverman was a regular fixture on Fox News Channel. He was on Gretchen Carlson's show almost every other day, it seemed. And here's why I think that's significant. It means he is a go-to atheist. Whenever they need someone to talk about any religious issue, not just atheism-related issues, but any religious-related issue, he is someone they bring on all the time. That means there is an atheist who is well-spoken and can say things on camera. He's not afraid of speaking his mind on camera in a positive way, in my opinion. He is a regular fixture there. It's not just the Catholic representative. It's not just the rabbi. It's not like their token evangelical who comes on screen. He is part of that mix. They call him all the time now. And I think that means there's a lot of people, especially on Fox News, when you think about their audience, who would never hear that perspective otherwise, who are now getting exposed to what he has to say. And I will say the times I have seen him, almost all the times I've seen him on Fox News, he is the rational one out of the panelists. Of course, I'm biased. Of course, I'm going to say that. But I think it's important that when you are seeing what certain religious representatives say, and they make no sense at all, and then he is up there saying, all we want is equality. We want to be treated the same way, religious people do. We're not saying you can't have your religious traditions. We're saying you don't have to be religious to enjoy the holiday season. When you have someone saying things like that are really not controversial on the surface, that's a big deal. So kudos to Dave Silverman for doing such a good job at his appearances that they keep inviting him back and probably will continue to invite him back in the times to come. Not only is it better for our community as a whole, whether or not you like him, I think it's important because it means other networks may now be looking for atheists to join them on similar panels. Number 2 is Rebecca Vitzman's response to Wolf Blitzer on CNN, where she said, "I'm actually an atheist." And what happened is back in May, after the tornado in Oklahoma, Wolf Blitzer from CNN was on the ground interviewing people, and he ended up talking on camera to a lady named Rebecca Vitzman. And basically, her house was in disarray. And she and her husband and their newborn child, they got out safely. But man, they're standing in the middle of chaos everywhere. And at some point, Wolf Blitzer, assuming she's a Christian, says, "Oh, so do you thank the Lord for, the fact that you all got out safely?" And she kind of laughs and she's like, I'm actually an atheist. And that quotation, that soundbite was everywhere for the next several weeks. And here's why that's significant. One, it showed that, Blitzer, and he's not the only one who does this, just assumed that anyone who got out alive, who was thankful about something, was automatically religious. He assumed they believe in God, and here he is on national TV, on live national TV, by the way, being told very politely, no, I don't believe in God. And she did it with a smile on her face. She knew she was lucky. She knew her family was safe, and that's a wonderful thing. But she didn't just cave in and say, oh, yeah, I thank God. No, she said, no, I'm an atheist. And that's okay, and there's nothing wrong with that. And it got people, that clip was on every website you could think of. Rebecca Vitzman did us all a favor by saying on national TV she's an atheist, and it doesn't seem like an act of courage per se, but when you're staring at the cameras, when you know everyone's watching you, when a famous reporter is just, you just kind of want to go along with them, and she had the courage to tell him, no, you're totally wrong. I'm not religious at all. So hats off to Rebecca for doing that and for showing Wolf Blitzer, like, you can't make that assumption about people in the middle of a disaster especially. And the number one atheism-related story of 2013 for me was the rise of atheist communities and atheist churches, so to speak. And you heard about this all throughout the year. I couldn't, as someone who blogs about this stuff all the time, I couldn't get away from these stories because they were everywhere. And in short, you saw so many atheist communities rise. There's a lot of Christians who go to churches and then become atheists, but they still miss that church community. They still miss congregating with people they love. They miss hearing an inspirational sermon, maybe even singing some songs. And this year, more so than any other year, you saw groups of people trying to recreate those communities in a secular way. So they basically asked themselves, can you hear an inspiring speech and sing some songs and gather with friends on a weekly or monthly basis without God getting into the mix? Can you teach morals and values? And you saw that happening, individually here and there for the past several years. But this year, you saw a huge leap by the people who run the Sunday Assembly, based out of London, to make this a worldwide movement. And you know what? It doesn't even involve, just have to be the Sunday Assembly. It was offshoots of those kind of groups. If you didn't like the way that service was run, you had atheist pastors, so to speak, where they would preach. They were former preachers, and they would give sermons about living life to its fullest and how you don't need religion to be a good person. They would form their own services. So, whether or not you attend them, whether or not you even like them, because I know they're controversial even within our own community, I think the fact that they were in the news all over the place, all year long too, saying there is a local community gathering for atheists, and we're not just going to sit around and bash religion. We're not even necessarily going to talk about religion. We're just going to meet and talk about the beauty of life, the beauty of science, how we can live life to its fullest, and we're going to have a good time doing it. And that thing seemed to strike a nerve with a lot of people who would never be caught dead with a random local atheist group or even a campus atheist group. They were drawn in by this idea of a Sunday Assembly or an atheist church. Now, the bigger question is, what will happen with those groups in the future? Will they stick around, or will they just fade away as a fad of this year and this year alone? We'll see about that. But I think that was easily the biggest story of the year because that shaped the way a lot of reporters and a lot of the media talked about atheists this past year. I would love to hear your thoughts on what you thought were the best stories of the year or the most significant stories of the year. If you disagreed with me, I would love to hear your alternative ideas in the comments, and let's start this debate. And by the way, if you want to see what I think is going to happen next year, just click up here and you'll see the video for what I think are going to be the big stories of 2014.